My name is Samir Shah. I run an independent television radio production company called Juniper, which I've been doing for over 20 years now. Prior to that, I used to work for the BBC. I was head of current affairs there and the head of political journalism. And as a result, that was where I built up my expertise and my knowledge. And so when I became an independent producer, that was the area in which I was commissioned. So I've constantly been making programs about British politics particularly, and I continue to do so. I make 2 weekly programs for the BBC about politics. So it's always been a part of the main part actually of my media world. Politics always changes in a democracy, and when I first got involved in politics and political journalism, we lived within a particular envelope of democratic politics. One side won the election, and you had a particular set of politics, and then another side did, and that varied, and that went all the way through, and it got quite heated. So there was a normal spectrum of political debate, and that persisted for a long, long time. And the public, on the whole, responded to that. I think what's happened in the last 10 years, there's been a huge disconnect between the democratic politics with which I was brought up and what now seems to be political engagement, which one could call activism. Direct action has always been part of one's political armory, but in my day it consisted of sit-ins and demos, but you basically bought into the political system. I think there is a much greater disconnect now amongst a younger generation who don't seem to buy into the political system and want to bring about change through activism rather than through democratic politics. Social media is, I think, one of the great new phenomenon of politics, actually. And I think, like many things, it cuts both ways. There are loads of advantages to social media. I think it's a good way of getting your thoughts out, and in some ways, it's quite democratic in that every individual has the ability to say what they want and have it heard by a much larger group of people than ever before. So I think there's been some very positive sides to social media. The downside we're all rather familiar with, in that it tends to end up with what we call the echo chamber. You start only talking to yourselves, to people who think like you. Without social media, you inevitably engaged with people who had differences of views and differences of opinion, and you had debate and discussion, and that's how you were brought up. The problem with social media now is that you don't need to engage in that. You can, through social media, only talk to people who think like you, who feel like you, and that becomes your world. And therefore you can reach out to hundreds of thousands of people all over the globe who think like you in a way you could never before, and therefore your own views are never challenged. And the heart of politics, seems to me, is about debate and argument and discussion, and let the best argument win. No, that is what social media is now stopping, and I think that's a real problem. I think it is the case that many organizations that you would expect to defend the values of liberal democracy are not doing so, and they're falling for what I would call the activist agenda. And I've always wondered why that has so much traction. We live in a world where if you want change, you do it through the democratic process. You use elections or whatever. You don't just do it because people are complaining in the streets about it. That's just one group of people. You don't know whether they represent the majority of the public. You don't know whether they represent anything at all. That's why we have democracy, to find out what people actually want, and then you can change things. So take journalistic places, which are my own world, the media world. They have a responsibility to be impartial and ask questions without fear or favor, and ask questions that should be asked by any impartial journalistic outfit. Increasingly, I find that they fear to do so. They won't ask questions, they won't interrogate areas that might incur the wrath of the social media world. And I think that's a really, really bad state of affairs, and it carries tremendous weight within media organizations. They won't ask these questions. So the social media world has a leverage beyond all reason that you can't ask this question, you can't say this, you can't examine this, you can't tell this story, because you'll have them against you, so you don't. And the reason you can't is because you'll get attacked for it. And too many organizations are fearful of that and will take the easy way out. As a baby boomer, what my world consists of, whether it was university or at work, people who disagreed with you, and you had discussions about it. You didn't not engage. In fact, you thought your own arguments were being tested, and that seems to have gone. And the testing of arguments and discussion, that's a real pity. We need to get back to that. One can disagree with all sorts of things. It's perfectly okay to disagree. We need to get back to a point where people can disagree about things and have a rational debate about it. I think the West, as we know it today, came about as a result of Enlightenment thinking. If putting it crudely, if you say prior to the Enlightenment, the order of things, the reason things were the way they were was based on the divine right of kings. And the Enlightenments, you said, no, it doesn't have to be like this. You can rearrange things based on reason. And that led to the rise of liberal democracy, that you had people in place in positions of power based on meritocracy, based on what would achieve the best outcomes, and that democracies, giving people the power to appoint these people, became the way the West developed. And it came out of this idea that society can be arranged based on the will of the people, and the idea that you can organize things based on rational discourse rather than on some either ideological, totalitarian, clerical way. I think you could be left-wing or right-wing and agree with those. I think the values associated with left-wing and right-wing, I think is independent of a belief in liberal democracy. I think you can be right-wing and believe in liberal democracy as a kind of Enlightenment phenomenon, and you can be left-wing and believe in it. The basic philosophy of new debate is one I agree with completely. I think we are faced with a challenge, both external, from China and its acolytes, and internal, trying to sow division within us. And I think that new debate wants to try and deal with both things using, as I say it again, the tools of the Enlightenment to do so. And that, I think, is the right thing to do. It's the only thing to do. And I'm very pleased that New Debate have sprung up as an organization that recognizes the existentialist threat liberal democracy is under. It doesn't work perfectly, but there's a hell of a lot good about it. The important thing for New Debate is that it becomes well known, and people go to it and they hear the arguments, and these arguments begin to have traction, and we start changing the dial in terms of the debate in the West. The ambition with a New Debate really starts moving that dial back to something reasonable.